Her family shaved her hair for shame, but the cowboy kissed her scars and called her beautiful. But what kind of pain forces a woman's own kin to strip her of dignity, leaving her with nothing but silence and scars? How does she survive half a lifetime of ridicule walking through town with her head covered, convinced no man would ever want her, and most of all, what happens when one quiet cowboy sees past the shame, takes her hand before everyone and dares to call her beautiful? The Wyoming wind carried dust like old secrets whispering through fences and broken shutters. On that wind walked Clara Whitmore, 50 years old, with a shawl pulled tight around her shoulders and a bonnet hiding the truth she never wanted the world to see. Her hair, once long, thick and chestnut, was gone. Years before her own kin had cut it off in anger, shaving her head to punish her for refusing a marriage she could not endure. They had called it discipline. She knew it was humiliation. The hair never grew back the same, leaving patches of tender, uneven scars that she covered each day with pins and fabric. To the town, she was the Whitmore spinster, the one who had outlived her usefulness. Too heavy, too plain, too scarred for any man to choose. She lived quietly, cooking for neighbors when they were ill, mending shirts for pennies, never asking for more than survival. Her dignity was her last possession, and she clung to it like a woman holding a candle in a storm. Every morning, Clara woke before dawn, kneading bread while the world still slept. She listened to the creak of the stove and told herself it was enough bread silence, a roof that did not leak. Yet at night, when she untied her bonnet, she saw her reflection in the darkened glass. The scars on her scalp caught the light like pale rivers, and she whispered, "Still here." Her family's cruelty had marked her, but it had not broken her. She had endured, but endurance is not the same as living. And deep down, Clara wondered if the West still held a place for a woman like her. She did not yet know that someone was watching, not with scorn, but with a gentleness that could change everything. She thought she had been condemned to a life of silence and scars. But what happens when a cowboy carrying his own wounds sees her not for what she lost, but for who she still is? The morning light came in thin coins over dry hollow, bright enough to show dust, gentle enough to forgive it. Clara crossed the square with a loaf wrapped in muslin and a small pouch of yeast she'd bartered for. She kept to the shade where awnings made a soft tunnel, her bonnet tied firm beneath her chin like a promise she could keep. At the pump, a boy reached for the ribbon at her throat, curious fingers, no malice. Clara flinched anyway, the way you do when old pain knows the road home. Before she could speak, a hand, broad sun-browned, lowered gently over the child's, turning mischief into a game of splashing water. The boy laughed, drenched his sleeves, and ran. "Morning, ma'am." The voice was steady, frayed a little by wind. Hat in his other hand, not on his head, no brim between them. "Name's Thomas." She nodded, cautious. He didn't let the moment stretch thin. He set the bucket on the well lip and worked the handle slow, as if drawing water should never be rushed. "Your bread," he said after a beat, glancing at the wrapped loaf, "travels farther than most men. Saw two hands from my ridge pass it down like a prayer last week. It's only flour and patience," Clara answered. "Then patience is a sort of mercy." His eyes met hers and held not a stare, a resting. "We've met once. Spring flood 10. No, 12 years back. You hauled quilts to the schoolhouse when we were moving cattle uphill. I remember the shawl, not the bonnet, but the way you put a warm cup into Mrs. Klein's hands, not on the table stuck." Memory turned its head. Clara could see it now, a younger Thomas in a soaked jacket carrying a child with a fever like a coal, saying little and doing much. A man who treated crisis as a thing to share, not to announce. "You've a long memory," she said. "For good moments," he answered. "Bad ones remember themselves too well." He did not look at her bonnet. He looked at her, carrying the loaf, the little pouch, the stiffness in her shoulders that said a body will learn to be a shield if asked too often. "There's coffee on my porch most mornings," he added, as if mentioning the weather. "If you'd ever like a cup placed in your hands." The words landed like a chair pulled out at a table that wasn't crowded. Clara shifted the loaf from one arm to the other. Invitations had been doors with traps in them before, but his were made of plain wood and open air. What would people say, she asked, surprised at herself for saying it aloud. "Whatever keeps their tongues from rusting," Thomas said, not unkindly. "I was raised to fix what's broken and let talk break itself." A woman passed, hesitated, the way a person does before a slow-moving wagon, then went on. Clara found her breath again. I'm men, she said the words simple as a stitch. Toys, shirts, the minds of children sometimes with stories. His mouth bent toward a smile. Then we're kin and trade. I've a filly with a saddle sore and a kitchen that could use the sound of stories. He shifted careful as if moving a lantern. Only if you'd like it. No owing. No owing. It rang inside her the way church bells do when you are still a field away low and sure. She should have said she was busy. She should have said she didn't visit ranches. Instead, she said, I could bring a pan of rolls that don't argue with butter. I'll leave a place on the rail, Thomas replied, tipping his hat not to end the talk, but to let it breathe. He picked up the pail, offered it to her with both hands so she could take it without hurry. You deserve a soft morning, Clara. Her name spoken like a blessing did a small, tidy thing inside her, like smoothing a bed you meant to sleep in. She walked away in the light bread at her hip bonnet, steady. She did not float. Women like her don't. But the road under her felt less like a sentence and more like a choice. That night she set the loaf on her table and for once did not eat standing. She untied the bonnet and let cool air pass over the pale rivers of scar. In the warped pain she saw the same face the years had given her, and a new question the day had brought. If a man can look you full in the eye and still see sky enough for kindness, is it time to meet him on a porch where the wind has no opinion? A cup placed in her hands, a place left for her on the rail, are these only courtesies or the first boards of a bridge she's longed to cross? The days that followed carried both warmth and weight. Clara found herself waking earlier, smoothing her apron twice instead of once, as though preparing to be seen even if no one came. The town square no longer felt like a gauntlet of whispers. It felt like a hallway she was crossing toward a door not yet open. On the fourth morning she went, a pan of rolls steam still lifting cradled in her arms. The porch of Thomas's ranch leaned gently, boards worn but steady. He was there already, waiting coffee steaming in tin mugs. He lifted one, held it out, not setting it down, just as he'd promised. She took it fingers, brushing his warmth beyond the coffee itself. Inside the house bore the marks of a man who fixed more than he spoke about a patched chair leg, harnesses mended, books stacked not for show, but for use. And yet there was absence too. A photograph turned face down on a shelf, a quilt folded too carefully to be casual. When her eyes lingered, he spoke softly. My wife, Anna, buried these 5 winters past. Folks still think I should have remarried by now. As if hearts are like fence posts, you just set a new one when the old breaks. Clara listened, her palms pressing against the pan of rolls. She knew something of being measured by others' timetables, of being told when and how she ought to belong. Her own scars itched beneath her bonnet, as if to remind her of the shame she had carried for decades. And yet when Thomas poured her another cup, his gaze did not waver to the cloth tied beneath her chin. He looked only at her hands, steady and competent, the way they broke a roll in 2 without crumbling it. Still doubt not. That evening, back in her room, she removed the bonnet. The mirror showed her scalp where hair had grown in uneven patches, thin rivers winding between pale ridges of skin. Her family had shaved her hair once, calling it justice, calling it shame. The cruelty of it lived still in her reflection. She pressed both palms against the table and whispered, how could any man look at this and not turn away? The echo in the small room had no answer. The next morning, whispers followed her to the well. She hides under that bonnet, one woman muttered. Wouldn't you? After what her kin did, another replied. They didn't lower their voices. Clara lowered her bucket instead, pulling water with hands that did not shake. But inside, a question bruised her heart. Was Thomas's kindness only pity? Was she a project to him, a burden to ease his loneliness? That afternoon he rode by her small garden, offering seed potatoes wrapped in burlap. Thought you might use these. Their stubborn things grow even in poor soil. She met his gaze, cautious. And what if I'm the soil that refuses? He shook his head, reins slack in one hand. Then the fault's not yours. Some things never had roots to give. But you, Clara, you've been tending others so long, maybe you've forgotten your own ground. His words planted something tender yet dangerous inside her. Because the struggle was no longer whether she could endure loneliness, she had proven that for years. The real question was whether she dared believe she could be chosen, scars and all. That night she lay awake, bonnet still tied, as though afraid of being betrayed by her own reflection. Her heart whispered of the man who remembered her shawl from 12 years ago, who placed cups in her hands, who never turned his eyes away. Yet fear coiled around hope like barbed wire. Can a woman scarred by cruelty ever trust that kindness isn't pity, but love, waiting with both hands open? The storm came at dusk, rolling over the valley with a growl of thunder that shook the window frames of Clara's small cabin. She sat by the hearth, bonnet still tied, when a pounding knock rattled the door. It was Thomas, soaked through hat-dripping voice, urgent. "The creek's rising. Fences won't hold. Come stay at my place till it passes." She hesitated, bonnet strings twisted in her fingers. To step into his house again was to risk being seen too closely. But another clap of thunder split the sky, and she nodded. He led her to his horse, steadying her mount with his hand firm at her back. By the time they reached his ranch, the rain had turned the yard into rivers. Inside, the fire glowed and the scent of coffee filled the air. He hung his coat, then turned to her. "Take it off, Clara. You'll catch cold." She froze. He meant the damp shawl, but her heart hammered at the thought of more. Slowly she unpinned the bonnet. For the first time in years, outside her own four walls, she let the cloth fall. The scars gleamed pale in the firelight. Her hair, patchy and uneven, framed them like broken threads of an old tapestry. She expected him to flinch, to look away. But Thomas stepped closer, his eyes softened, steady as a field after rain. He reached not to touch her scars, but to lift her chin so she could meet his gaze. "They called this shame," he whispered. She nodded, breath caught. Then they were blind. And then, without ceremony, without hesitation, he bent and pressed his lips gently to the crown of her head. Not to erase the scars, but to bless them. Clara's breath broke. The years of silence, the weight of humiliation, cracked like thunder outside. Tears came, not of shame this time, but of release. For the first time, someone had looked at her scars and called them something other than ruin. She whispered, almost afraid. "You don't pity me." "Pity," he said softly. "No, I see you, Clara. All of you. And I call it beautiful." The storm outside raged on, but inside something else quieted. She was no longer bound by the shame her family had carved into her. She was no longer only the woman under the bonnet. She was a woman seen, scars and all, and still chosen. That night, as the rain beat against the windows, Clara sat by the fire with her hair uncovered. She felt the freedom like a river swelling past its banks, dangerous, powerful, but cleansing. Her scars had been kissed, not cursed. But could Clara believe that freedom might last once the storm passed and the whispers of the town returned? The storm passed with dawn. The earth rinsed raw, steamed beneath a pale sun. Clara rose from her chair by the hearth, shawl draped across her shoulders, but her bonnet forgotten on the table. The weight of it no longer clung to her the way it once had. Thomas was already outside, mending a fence post the flood had loosened. His movements were careful, deliberate, like a man used to shouldering work alone. When she brought him bread and coffee, he took them wordlessly, then leaned on the post, as if weighing something heavier than the rails in his hands. At last he spoke. "There's something you ought to know about me, Clara." She waited, heart steady now, no longer afraid of silence. "My father, he wasn't a kind man. Folks here think of me as steady, maybe quiet. But truth is, I learned early that silence was safer than speaking. Safer for me, safer for my ma." His voice roughened. "When she died, I swore I'd never raise my hand in anger. Not at stock, not at neighbors, not at—" His eyes met hers, steady and raw. "Not at a wife, but the cost of that vow was distance. I kept myself apart. Even Anna, God rest her, never knew the whole of it." The name of his late wife lingered like smoke. Clara studied him, the scar above his brow, the way his shoulders seemed too broad for one man to carry alone. She thought of her own scars, branded not on flesh, but on dignity, and how silence had been her prison too. "You're telling me this now?" she asked softly. "Because he said, when I kissed your scars last night, I realized you had the right to know mine." The words struck her still. Her family had shaved her hair to break her. His father had raised his voice and fist to break him. And yet here they stood, two broken people who had chosen gentleness over cruelty. Clara reached for his calloused hand. "We've both lived under other people's shadows, Thomas. Maybe it's time we let the sun fall on us instead. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he closed his hand around hers, holding on as though that single gesture was his truest vow. That evening, when the fire was low, he set a small box on the table. Not polished, not new, and old tobacco tin edges rusted. Inside lay three things: a thimble, a compass, and a plain brass ring. I kept these, he said. Didn't know why. Thought maybe they'd remind me of where I'd been. But now I think maybe they're for where I hope to go. He pushed the ring gently toward her. I don't want you to hide, Clara. Not here. Not ever again. Her hands trembled as she touched it. Not because it was gold, it wasn't, but because it was honest. He had laid his secrets bare and placed a vow not of pity, but of choice in her hands. Would Clara dare believe that two people scarred by the past could build something unbreakable together? It did not take long for whispers to drift through town like tumbleweed caught in the wind. When Clara walked into the general store without her bonnet, the women at the counter stilled. One clutched her shawl tighter. Another muttered, "Bold showing herself like that." The men did not laugh out loud, but their smirks carried sharper edges than knives. By the time she stepped out with her flour sack, a word followed her on to the dusty street, shamed. It was the same word her family had branded her with years ago, and hearing it again cut deep like the shaving of her hair all over. Only this time she did not run. She lifted her chin even as her hands shook. That night, she told Thomas. He listened, face darkening, not with anger at her, but at the smallness of those who could not see past scars. Let me speak to them, he said. No. Her voice was calm but firm. This is not a fight for fists or fury. If I hide now, they'll be right. But if I walk into that church on Sunday, head uncovered beside you, then maybe they'll see. He studied her, then nodded slowly. Then I'll walk with you. Sunday came bright and sharp, the kind of morning where the sun felt almost like judgment. The church bell rang and people gathered, voices hushed. When Clara entered, uncovered whispers swelled like locusts in the rafters. And then it happened. Thomas reached for her hand. Not a polite gesture, not hidden. He held it firm, steady, and raised their joined hands, just enough for all to see. His voice carried low but sure. You call this shame. I call it beauty. You call her ruined. I call her mine. The silence that followed was heavy. Not everyone's eyes softened, not every mouth closed. But something shifted. A few heads bowed, not in scorn, but in recognition. Clara felt her knees weaken, not from fear, but from release. She had stood in the open scars bare, and was still held. As the hymn began, her voice joined it, quieter than the rest but present. And for the first time since she was a girl, she did not hide her face when she prayed. Outside after the service, a little girl tugged at her sleeve. Your hair looks like my mama's quilt, she whispered shyly. Patchy but warm. Tears welled in Clara's eyes. She knelt and kissed the child's cheek. The town had not fully changed. Some stares lingered, some lips curled, but enough had shifted. Enough for her to know the truth. The prison of shame had lost its bars. She had walked through the fire of judgment and found her hand still held. But could Clara and Thomas turn that fragile victory into a lasting life together? Winter came softer that year, as though even the prairie wind had grown tired of cruelty. Snow clung to the eaves of the cabin, but inside there was warmth, bread rising on the hearth, the steady scrape of Thomas's boots across the floor, and the sound of Clara's laughter, rare but blossoming now, like crocuses in thaw. The town did not stop whispering entirely, but it no longer mattered. Where once her scars had felt like chains, they now seemed like threads woven into a story that only she and Thomas could read fully. A story of surviving and then of choosing. One evening he came in from the barn with a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Couldn't find gold, he said, placing it in her lap. But I figured you might like this better. Inside lay a comb carved from walnut-polished, smooth, strong teeth, glinting in the firelight. She touched it carefully, her breath catching. For my hair, she whispered. For every strand, he answered softly. Even the ones you thought no one would ever touch again. Her eyes brimmed, and for the first time she did not flinch when he reached to run it gently through what hair had grown back silver at the temples, uneven but hers. That night as the fire burned low, Clara pressed her forehead against his shoulder. Do you ever regret it, she asked. What choosing me? Scars and all. He didn't hesitate. Clara, I didn't choose you despite them. I chose you with them. Because they tell me you survived. And because you're the gentlest soul I've ever known. Her heart, long buried under years of silence, swelled until it felt too large for her chest. She thought of the girl she once was shorn and humiliated, believing no one would ever call her beautiful again. And here was a man who kissed the very scars meant to shame her and called them holy. Spring arrived with birdsong and tender shoots of green. On market day, when Clara carried loaves of bread into town, no one whispered. Instead, a woman she once feared would sneer asked softly, "Would you share your recipe?" Clara smiled, not in triumph, but in peace. She had not silenced shame by hiding. She had silenced it by living. At dusk, she and Thomas sat on the porch, 2 mugs of coffee steaming between them. He reached for her hand. She let him, not with hesitation, but with certainty. The sun dipped low, painting the fields gold. And in that light, Clara knew her story was no longer about what had been taken from her. It was about what she had chosen and what had chosen her back. A home, a partner, a love that had arrived not in youth, but in time enough. The world had once stripped Clara bare in shame. Now it clothed her in belonging. And perhaps that is the deepest kind of beauty, when love doesn't erase the scars, but makes them part of the song. In the end, Clara's story was never truly about the scars others left on her, but about the quiet strength she carried within. What once was meant as humiliation became the very place where love rooted itself, because Thomas did not look away. He kissed what others mocked, and in doing so reminded Clara and all of us that dignity does not fade with age or with pain. It grows stronger when it is seen, honored, and cherished. Maybe that is what life offers in its later chapters, the chance to be known for who we are, not for what was taken from us. Clara discovered that love did not arrive in perfection, but in patience. And perhaps that's the kind of love that lasts. Friends, if Clara's journey touched your heart, may it remind you that no scar, no sorrow, and no season of life can take away your worth. You are not too late. You are not forgotten. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, of second chances, quiet courage and love that finds us when we least expect it, please subscribe to None Wild West Saga. Share this story with someone who might need it today and leave us a comment. Would you like to see what happens next for Clara and Thomas? Or would you like to hear another tale of resilience and late-blooming love? We read every word you write, and just like Clara, your voice matters.